listener, log off, go read a book, stop having your
Stop listening.
weird parasocial relationship with us.
This is the good content, right?
Exactly.
I mean, this is one of the things. If you could just have 100% good content, all of your problems would be solved.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le boonga, boonga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustavia, on fait le boonga, boonga.
Hello, everybody. This is BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. I'm Alex Hochuli, back from the great Brazilian savannah, the land of corn and soy, healing crystals, aliens, agroboys, modernist architecture, and car-centric urban planning. George Hoare is also back from a certain shire. I'm not sure which.
Yes, from Oxfordshire. I don't have a list as impressive as that, but it's got a river in it and some nice people. And yeah, it's a nice part of
Nice people
Britain.
are better than not nice people, I suppose. Ryan Zickgraf, who now is his first appearance as a contributing editor also to this podcast. So welcome, Ryan. Wait. Yeah.
Oh, wow. We have sound effects? That's amazing.
I should do so much more with the sound effects capacity here. And that's the only one I've got uploaded. And I should really have a whole range of options at my disposal. Anyway, Ryan, you've been back. You've been back. You are back from somewhere. Where have you been?
I've been to the Jersey Shore, which is kind of a mythical place in American pop culture lore. You know, like it's there was a MTV reality show about it, and this, I guess, where like Tony Soprano went on vacation. It's an interesting place though, because it will really make you hate baby boomers once again.
Oh yeah, because
everybody that hangs out there that goes to bars is like over 55. They have no responsibilities. They have a lot of money because a lot of these properties have like tripled in value over the last 10 to 20 years. And they're just, I don't know, it's like spring break over there for the boomers.
Wow. Okay. It's funny because I've just finished a book, an oldish book that takes place in part in Jersey Shore, which is Philip Roth's Sabbath's Theater, which is, so he lives on the Jersey Shore, but of course it's like Roth's Jew world, which is, and of course there are some of the Italians there, but I guess the vision that we have of the Jersey Shore is Italian descendant Americans, not Italians as Americans insist on saying, Italian descendant Americans.
Yeah, I did actually see a couple people flying the Italy flag just below the American flag. But I will tell you this, not many people there are reading Philip Roth.
Right. Yeah, they're mainly like working out. I'm just going entirely from my reality TV knowledge, which is extremely limited as it goes. So maybe you shouldn't listen to anything that I say, but it's guys, oiled up guys working out, girls being a bit tardy, all that kind of vibe. Anyway, speaking of culture, what we're going to be talking about today, going on some of Ryan's recent work and other things that we've kind of batted about recently, but we haven't done an episode on kind of U.S. political culture in a little while, and we try not to do too much of that, not least because that's well served by other podcasts. But we have the opportunity to talk about a couple of things. One is the return of King of the Hill, the animated sitcom. We're going to do that first. Maybe some other TV representations of the US will come up in that discussion. Then we're going to move on to the media and the idea that media is a metaphor. Ryan's written this article on Neil Postman and how we're still being distracted to death, and maybe how that's changed relative to the TV age, because these things often blur into one another, these critiques of media, but they represent quite different ages, which is something that we've talked about before, but we're going to delve into that. And then finally, the Democratic Socialists of America is going to be something that we discuss. They've had their recent conference, and we haven't discussed the American left, or many lefts in general, in a little while, which I think is telling in its own right. Maybe snarky listeners will be like, oh yeah, telling because you guys hate the left or something like that. But telling because the left isn't up to much. And I think the kind of inversion of political poles that we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years continues to deepen as a phenomenon. So anyway,
Yeah. Recently, we've been all right.
right, which is a great
That's an Arrested Development
joke. Yeah, he's going to be all right. Thank God. Anyway, we're not going to amputate this discussion any further. We should continue. Right. So, King of the Hill. For the listeners who don't know, and I'm a big fan of this show. It's an animated sitcom created by Mike Judge, whom you might know also from Beavis and Butthead, Office Space, the film Idiocracy, another film. Daria, I think, which was an animated sitcom kind of spin-off of Beavis and Butthead. Anyway, a great satirist in my view, Mike Judge, and he created King of the Hill. It ran from 1997 to 2009, so I guess in one regard you could say that it's very end of history as a show. But notably, it's the main characters. I mean, I guess for listeners who completely aren't familiar with the show at all, maybe you're not, because although it's been revamped and they've just put out a new season of it, it's something which was running ages ago. So you might not have come across it, but it features a family of three. Hank Hill, who's a kind of quietly conservative, quite conformist sort of man, and his wife, who is a bit more, has a touch of arrogance to her, and their son, who is seen through the eyes of the father as somewhat effeminate, but because he's not really into sports and he's a bit tubby, and therefore is seen is a kind of the liberal one in the family. But importantly, none of this is cast in particularly sharp political terms. In fact, it treats its characters with a great degree of affection. It's very human and kind of quietly funny, which is why I didn't really like it as a teenager, because I wanted to be smashed over the head with the comedy, right? I liked Family Guy, whereas King of the Hill was far too subtle for my stupid brain. Anyway, so it's come back, and in a way, it's emblematic, I think, of a certain social consensus in the US, which no longer exists. And as Ryan notes at the start of his article on King of the Hill, just a brief piece kind of commenting on the first episode of the new season, there's been a long-running kind of meme, as it were, which is like, would King of the Hill have voted for Trump? Which is incredibly tedious, actually, as a discussion. We don't want to do that, but we do want to discuss a little bit what King of the Hill kind of represents. So I don't know if anybody has immediate thoughts on this. Ryan, I mean, I think you didn't go very deep into the new season, but I guess the initial impressions were that it tries to maintain consensus, but it doesn't manage it.
I don't know if I would say that. What it seems to me, and I will tell you that it's been a while, like you said, when I watched the original, I did not watch any reruns. So, it's going on 15, 20 years ago. But what I found is that they tried to tiptoe. I mean, it's hard in the age of hyperpolitics to avoid politics. And so what they do in the new King of the Hill is to sort of treat it with kid gloves, and to make Hank still have conservative, small c conservative tendencies, but also even more open-minded than before. For instance, there's one scene that I remember where they're like at a construction store, like a Home Depot, and there's Girl Scouts that are selling what used to be called Samoas. Like they're these coconut cookies. And when Hank asked for Samoas, they're like, we call them, and I can't even remember what the actual term is.
Caramel Delights or something?
Caramel Delights. That is correct.
Nice.
And you would suspect that he would chafe on, the idea of the cultural appropriation of a Girl Scout cookie, but instead, like, he kind of softens and just says, yeah, that sounds nice. We like to be nice. And it just kind of, it was a moment that rang kind of a little hollow for me. And also just like some of the old humor, I think, has been sanded down, and to try to, it feels a little soft.
Well, I mean, I think this is the thing. The series originally, through the late 90s and early and most of the 2000s, was kind of soft. I mean, I guess that was the kind of pitch of it, and it was different from Beavis and Butthead, which is so clearly associated with alternative culture, with MTV and whatever. And King of the Hill was kind of, this kind of guy, Mike Judge, who's done Beavis and Butthead and comes in with Greg Daniels, does this thing which is at a very different pace. And Mike Judge commented at the time, he lived in Texas in a kind of town similar to the fictional Arlen, Texas, which is like a kind of mid-sized town, I guess, somewhere between Dallas and Austin or something like that. And it's kind of very ordinary. And I guess that's the point, right? And it goes against all the kind of precepts of alt culture, which is a bit slackerish or a bit kind of edgy or confrontational in various different guises. And this is just very ordinary and kind of very mainstream without making a big show of it, right? And again, like where the humor comes out is like in these kind of these little chuckle moments, right? It's not like you're gonna laugh out loud, and it's not going to be the type of comedy, at least the original series wasn't. It's not the type of comedy which you go, yes, you go, haha, not yes, because that yes is like, yeah, you got him, right? And a lot of comedy today is very much based on you got him, right? At this kind of affirmation of the rightness of the critique of a certain target, right? And that goes for Ricky Gervais talking about trans people, or it might be, or Dave Chappelle, or indeed like various liberal comics which do the same thing and skewer racists and whatever. And the original King of the Hill didn't do that. What I find interesting in the attempt to revamp the show, and again, with all the caveats about it being incredibly tedious, that we're faced with yet another kind of revamp and retelling of the same story within the return to the same universe, is that what it does is it becomes. So let me put this clear. The original King of the Hill had an element of fish out of water to it because Hank himself was a little bit already antiquated relative to the world of the 90s and 2000s. In fact, Bobby Hill is much more at home in that world, the pudgy sports avoider, whereas Hank Hill is very much lives in 1970s America and arguably, probably refers more even back to 1950s America. Although, interestingly, his father, character called Cotton, who's a World War II vet, is incredibly aggressive, racist, and so on, and Hank shies away from him. So you have this nice kind of generational interplay where the boomer Hank is not just the old-fashioned guy, because there's something before him which is even more kind of more old-fashioned or more reactionary or whatever. Anyway, there's still a little tinge of fish out of water sort of story to the original King of the Hill. Whereas in this revamp, it goes in on that hard, because what happens is that Hank Hill has been away in Saudi Arabia working for Aramco in this fake American village in the middle of Saudi Arabia. There's some funny little jibes there. But he returns to the United States of the 2020s and is a bit horrified at what he finds, but it lays it on thick, right? Whereas previously it was like these little subtle elements of Hank being horrified at things he finds. Whereas now it's like it nails it. It nails it quite hard. And the problem is that in an age of kind of culture war in the US, where it's, or indeed hyperpolitics, is that you almost can't avoid it. So people are ended up treated as archetypes of something, so they're representative of certain social groups or categories, whereas the original King of the Hill worked because they were human individuals and they were kind of ordinary and they were not held up as representative of something other than maybe, I guess you could argue, maybe, I mean, with the proviso that all comedy works with archetypes a bit, but
exactly. I mean, all drama does. And I think it's an interesting device, right? So they've come back to the US, Hank and Peggy. So they return and see what's different. And there is one scene where they're kind of in bed and they're like, has Texas changed? And it's particularly, I think, a lot of the stuff in the first episode is about the pandemic, and I think it is deliberately supposed to be a little bit sharper, perhaps. And if you compare it to Silicon Valley, which is another thing that Mike Judge has done, which is, I think, one of the funniest. I don't know how accurate it is because I haven't lived in that Silicon Valley world, but I would imagine there's quite a lot of truth in it. But that kind of commentary of and the outsider's perspective, or how have things changed, or why are people acting in this certain way in this context. And I have to say, I did find the first episode very enjoyable. It was much better than I thought it was going to be, because I went to it with this like, oh, here's another thing from 15 years ago. Why can nothing ever just finish? But actually, I was I think I was quite impressed that there were some little kind of bits about the masks and around the pandemic and some kind of little signals, but it wasn't too crudely done. And then the second episode, there's this kind of story about a competition about beer. The beer that Hank wants to make is very boring, and the beer that Bobby wants to make is much more exciting and bold and tastes like fruit, and that kind of how things have changed. So I think it is a chance for Mike Judge to basically be like, yeah, this is what 2020 is like, or 2025 or 2024. I'm 23 probably when it was written and produced. Like, what is American culture at the moment, and how would it look strange to somebody who might have been away for 15 years, and these things which are like I guess this would be the idea, are objectively a little bit strange. But anyway, that was my thought. I was a bit like, yeah, I'm not sure I particularly want to watch this, but then I thought, actually, after having legally watched the first episode, I thought, yes, I will also continue to legally stream the second and third episodes. I won't go and download them from torrents, because you shouldn't do this. But yeah, I think I will continue to legally stream
Interesting.
the rest of the season.
I'm not au fait with these ethics, but Ryan.
I was just going to say that I think maybe I am misremembering a bit of the way that the like comedic rhythms of King of the Hill used to be. I guess, and this is maybe just a cultural preference, but I think it was sort of one of the first examples of what critics now called like hangout shows, where it's not incredibly rat-a-tat-tat funny. It's just more like you get to know particular characters and you're just hanging out with them a lot. And, it's funny, we're talking, about The Office and The Paper, but a lot of those shows are hangout shows, especially over the course of seasons, where it becomes less and less funny. The characters grow personally and become like less jerks. But the humor fades away, but people want to hang out with their friends and have a Thursday evening with them. And so to me, that's a little bit of what the King of the Hill is like. I do think that Hank Hill does seem like an actual person. He doesn't seem just like a collection of gags or a caricature. I'm just not sure I want to spend, more than a half an hour with him,
Right. Well, but I think that's well observed, right? Because it's based on characters, and what the new season does do well at times is, for example, to pick up on an example that George hinted at, Bill Dauterive, who in the original series is a kind of a bit of a he's kind of a bit of a fat slob, I guess. He's an army barber. He's a bit of a loser. He's kind of in love with Hank Hill's wife, Peggy Hill, but can't really show that. And he's he's less of a kind of, I guess, conformist, small c conservative in the way that Hank is incredibly uptight. There's a running gag about Hank having a small urethra, which is like a funny way of saying anally retentive, I guess, except that he's urethrally retentive or whatever. But there's a gag there, right? What's interesting is that you come back post-pandemic and Bill Dauterive, the neighbor, has become a shut-in and a slob. He's just ballooned in size and just lives ordering stuff online and watching streaming shows. And I mean, it's a little bit too much on the head with that, I think. But it still feels like a natural extension of the character, rather than what often happens with a TV series where they have to invent new wacky elements to a personality to keep the thing going, which is what happens with The Simpsons as of season, God knows, 15 or whatever. But anyway, I think what is interesting, I mean, leaving the TV show to one side and what it kind of reveals, because I think, Ryan, you were of the opinion that a show like King of the Hill almost becomes impossible to make nowadays in the way that it once was. You're right that whereas South Park sharpens its knives, King of the Hill offers an awkward group hug. This new series means well, but the harder it tries to bring us together, the less funny it becomes. So, I mean, can you unpack that a little bit?
I just think that I found myself, I tried to rewatch episode 2 last night and I fell asleep, to be honest. I just think that, so right now, South Park has for a while, it was staying away from partisan politics, or at least the kind where they're putting in presidents of the United States in the episodes. This season, they've gone full anti-Trump. I guess they're part of the hashtag resistance or whatever is left in Trump too. And they portrayed Trump, I think, having sex with the devil or doing something with the devil. It's all over the top and maybe a little too precious, but it did have, South Park I've found recently to have more funny for one, but also just fun political points. And I just feel like King of the Hill is ambling. And there's part of me that feels like Hank Hill is a little bit of like a noble savage to like people that live in Manhattan.
Right.
Right. And that there's a seeking of like the good conservatives or the good middle American Texas people. And I feel like in this season, they lean on that a little much. Like they just underscore his like common decency all the time. And his complaints are pretty low key. And maybe that's keeping with the character. I just didn't find it that funny.
No, I think I would kind of agree. It's not that funny. I mean, but it's
well observed.
It's less unfunny than something like Mountainhead, which you might not have seen. So Jesse Armstrong, one of the creators of Peep Show, also created Succession. Clearly, like one of the leading satirists, so British at least, I would say, particularly after I think Armando Iannucci, who probably held that title before, kind of got a little bit deranged by political events, perhaps from his previous clear-sightedness of the problems of British politics. So the problem with this Mountainhead show is that it tries too hard. I think this is the more of a problem, particularly post Trump too, is that something which is trying too hard to like skewer, as Alex was saying, like to have the definitive like blow. It's like it just comes across as very liberal and like cringingly unfunny. Whereas, yeah, I didn't. There maybe weren't any moments I laughed out loud at King of the Hill, but there weren't any moments where I was like, oh, I can't be doing with this. I just like want to switch it over. And I think that is a problem with a lot of comedy in general, and particularly more kind of satirical, is that it essentially the punchline is often Trump is bad, Trump is stupid. It's like, okay, that's not particularly funny, and it's not just unfunny, but it's like annoyingly unfunny.
But I think we have to say, the opposite is also unfunny, right? Oh, the liberals are so stupid. Like,
yeah,
the
exactly.
Anti-liberal, it's like,
yeah.
it goes both ways, and
that's why I think Silicon Valley is a good satire, because it has the kind of the logic of the situation with these characters who are somewhat believable, doing things which are ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, I would give a qualified defense of King of the Hill. I wasn't a fan of the original though, so I didn't. I sort of saw stray episodes, so I don't think I had anything really invested. And that's another problem with all of this nostalgia kind of serving stuff, is like a lot of it is like as you said, Ryan, like would the I googled King of the Hill, and the first thing that comes up on Google is like, is Hank Hill a Republican? Would he have voted for Trump? That's a distortion of any kind of cultural analysis. If the first question you have to answer is like, what is their orientation to Trump? I think particularly as Hank Hill is Republican coded. I think this is a good way to say something offensive, is to say that something is something coded. You can say to you can get around all kinds of things by just saying something is something coded. So,
but I think there's also like a pointedness in like within the culture wars or hyperpolitics, is that if someone is Republican code, he is not Republican in a way that like it's a deliberate choice. It's like, well, obviously he is, because that's the milieu that he belongs in, class, locale, etc., age, gender, all the rest of it, whatever kind of demographic categories you want to wield in this discussion. It's like, well, obviously he is, right? But it's not like a kind of he's not a militant, right? To use a term which almost seems a bit old-fashioned in such a context. But yeah.
One thing I would say is one thing that is interesting to me, and it kind of makes sense with the location. Like, there's a lot of sitcoms that take place in the suburbs, but none of them are political because the suburbs are not a political place. Whereas, the politics of the city come out often in shows about cities, and then in rural areas you get sort of the opposite. So you get the the hard-coded conservatives versus the hard-coded liberals, but the suburbs are a place of no politics. And so it would kind of be silly in a way for the King of the Hill to focus overtly on it.
Yeah, no, that's very good.
Hello friends, you've reached the end of a sample from an episode only available to subscribers. We put out 2 episodes a month for free. For access to the rest in its entirety, please join us at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers receive original, exclusive episodes with the entirety of the BungaCast cast. That's George Hoare, myself Alex Hochuli, and our contributing editors, Philip Cunliffe, Amber Lee Frost, Catherine Liu, Lee Jones, Alex Gurevich, and Lee Phillips. We've got extended interviews with guests, episodes on current affairs, and original episodes on theory, history, and culture, so as to understand the crises of our times. We also have the BungaCast Reading Club, where Phil, George, and myself present the key books and essays necessary for understanding the world today, how we got here, and where we might be going. Subscribers also get a digital subscription to Damage Magazine, with whom we're partnered, and you can find all this info at patreon.com/bungacast. We do hope you'll join us. These are turbulent times, and ideologically confused ones as well. What we try to do is find political clarity, to move beyond the decadent age of Bunga Bunga.
De A ou pas se taire.